A remotely operated vehicle, 100 meters beneath the sea, captured a shocking scene. A diver, having run out of oxygen, was slipping into hypothermia. With his last strength, he waved at the camera. Then his body began to convulse. It meant he would be dead within minutes, but rescue was still 10 minutes away. All signs pointed to one thing: he wasn't going to survive. Yet in the end, he showed the world what a miracle looks like. September 18, 2012. At an offshore oil field in the North Sea, a Swedish dive support vessel named Topaz was preparing to replace a section of subsea pipeline. There were 127 crew members on board, including 12 saturation divers. The diver from the opening scene was one of them. To better understand what happened, we need to explain a bit about how saturation diving works. To adapt to the extreme pressure underwater, before diving, they enter a specially designed chamber on the ship. From outside, the chamber is then pressurized to match the pressure of the surrounding seabed. Not always the seabed exactly. It depends on the working depth. To prevent decompression sickness, the gas inside isn't normal air, but a mix of helium and oxygen. Once the diver's blood is mixed and fully saturated with helium, the divers get ready to head to the seabed. Before entering the water, they move into a smaller chamber, called the diving bell. It has the same pressure and gas mix. The bell is lowered to the target depth, and divers exit directly to work. While they're working, the support vessel will always stay positioned above them. At that time, the ship, bell, and divers are all connected. Once the job is done, the divers return to the bell, which is lifted and reconnected to the chamber. Once back inside the chamber, they can live inside for weeks at a time. Whenever deep-sea work is needed, they can descend in the diving bell. No additional pressurization needed. After all, tasks are completed. They only need to decompress once before coming out. This greatly improves efficiency. This is what we call saturation diving, because the whole process resembles space operations. These divers are often called underwater astronauts. They're highly paid, but the risks are just as high. On top of that, the pressure takes a heavy toll on the body and mind. So after returning to land, they often need a month to recover. That day, the pipeline to be replaced. It was 100 meters underwater. Since the workload wasn't heavy, only 4 saturation divers were assigned. 1 stayed in the chamber for coordination, 1 assisted inside the diving bell, and 2 went out to work underwater. The ship activated dynamic positioning, which uses computer control to hold the vessel in place. At 8:13 p.m., 3 divers entered the diving bell. The one remaining inside was Diver 3, Duncan Alcock. The first diver that went out was David Yu, and Diver 2, Chris Lemons. At 8:21 p.m., the bell began descending. Diver 3, Duncan, helped them suit up and connected something called life support umbilicals. These are essentially bundles of tubes and cables. They supply oxygen, power, communication, and even hot water. The hot water is to prevent bodies' heat loss in the 4 degrees Celsius water. They also carry 2 emergency oxygen tanks, but the oxygen inside only lasts about 5 minutes. So the diver's survival basically depends entirely on the cable system. This is known as the umbilical. At 8:37 p.m., the 2 saturation divers exited the bell, one after another. After about a minute of steady descent through the water, they safely reached the seabed. This place is a nightmare for those with claustrophobia or fear of deep sea. Everything around them was pitch black, silent like death. Even with headlamps, the murky water could disorient them. You couldn't even tell the difference from up and down. Here, finding the work site was harder than the work itself. 12 minutes later, they reached their destination. They skillfully removed a section of pipe and installed a new one. The entire process went smoothly. After that, they followed the umbilical back toward the bell. But all of a sudden, the weather worsened. The wind reached 35 knots, and waves rose above 5 meters. Under normal conditions, the ship's positioning system should have handled it easily. But the system's alarms suddenly went off. The dynamic positioning system had failed. The vessel began slowly drifting away with the waves. Since the ship, bell, and divers were all connected together, and there were many metal structures below, as the divers were dragged along, their umbilicals could easily get snagged. The crew immediately ordered them to drop everything immediately and return to the bell. But at that moment, something went wrong. Diver 2, Chris's umbilical, suddenly got caught on a structure below. Diver 1, David, saw it and rushed over to help. But when he was just 2 meters away, his own line ran out, so he asked the team in the bell to give him more slack. Meanwhile, Chris's line grew tighter and tighter, and he couldn't free himself at all. Chris was stuck in place like an anchor on the seabed. Meanwhile, the ship was pushed farther away by the waves. Just a few seconds later, Chris's umbilical snapped. David was immediately dragged away with the ship, with no other option. David had to follow his line back to the bell. Everyone was stunned. Without the umbilical, Chris's lights would soon go out, and his body temperature would start to drop. Although his suit carried 2 emergency oxygen tanks, the oxygen tanks would only last about 5 minutes. The ship kept drifting away, putting more distance between them and Chris. 5 minutes after the line snapped, based on estimates, Chris's oxygen should have been gone. But the positioning system still hadn't recovered. The captain decided to manually steer the vessel back. But no matter what they tried, the ship just spun in place. Their distance from Chris had grown to 192 meters. It had been 11 minutes since the break. They decided to search for Chris using an ROV, based on where the line broke. Chris should still be near the metal structure, but visibility underwater was extremely poor, and they could see nothing but a few fish. After searching for a few minutes, the outline of the structure appeared. Then, an astonishing sight came into view. The moment they found Chris, everyone was stunned. He was lying alone on top of a metal platform. It was unimaginable what fear and despair he had endured. No one knew how he had managed to climb up from the seabed. As the ROV approached, he even raised a hand toward the camera. At that moment, it had been 22 minutes since the line snapped. But suddenly, Chris's body began to convulse. What it meant was that he was close to dying. The crew were frantic with anxiety, but there was nothing they could do. The ship was still spinning in place. A few seconds later, Chris stopped convulsing. His life was entering its final stage. Another 3 minutes passed, and the ship was still stuck in place. Every attempt had failed. They decided to force restart the dynamic positioning system. Unexpectedly, the force restart actually worked. The captain immediately switched to autopilot and headed straight toward Chris. When they arrived, 28 minutes had passed since the line snapped. It had been 5 minutes since he stopped convulsing. The captain reactivated the positioning system inside the diving bell. Diver 1 David was already suited up. As soon as the ship stabilized, he immediately exited the bell and swam toward Chris. "36 minutes and 26 seconds after the break, David finally brought him back to the bell. Now he was no longer alone, but his breathing and pulse had completely stopped. Diver 3, Duncan, immediately began resuscitation. For Duncan, Chris was not only his colleague, but also his disciple. After 2 long resuscitation attempts, a miracle happened. Chris's chest began to rise and fall. Slowly, he was breathing again.
I was just so elated. At that point, I didn't know if he had any brain damage. I didn't know if he'd be the same Chris. I didn't know if he'd ever speak again, but I knew he was breathing. He was alive.
After a few minutes, Chris began to regain consciousness. After a short while, his movement returned as well. After sitting up, he began talking to his teammates.
I remember almost feeling a little bit pissed off with him. in the same way that if you have a child that wanders off and they're not meant to, and you're frantically looking for them, when you do find them, as well as the relief you've also got a little bit of anger.
Watching all this through the cameras, the crew were overjoyed, but to avoid further accidents, they immediately brought the bell back up. After decompression, Chris was taken to rest inside the vessel. Only then did they learn what he had gone through underwater. After the umbilical snapped, Chris collapsed onto the seabed. With his headlamp out, he was surrounded by complete darkness. Chris instantly lost all sense of direction. After several seconds, he managed to stand again. His first thought was to find the metal structure and climb to the top of it. That way, he would be easier to spot. But with super low visibility, he had no idea where he was located at. He didn't know which direction to go either. If he chose the wrong direction, he wouldn't even find his way back. Chris was overwhelmed with panic, but he decided to take a gamble. And from that moment on, his luck began to turn. After taking a dozen steps, Chris felt something, a metal support beam. He remembered this place. There should be a platform about 11 meters up. After climbing for over 2 minutes, Chris finally reached the top of platform. He originally thought he would see the diving bell's lights, but there was nothing, just endless darkness all around. Chris felt a deep sense of despair. For a moment, he thought about surfacing, but quickly realized it was impossible. Even without decompression sickness, before his oxygen ran out, he wouldn't make it to the surface. Without heated water, he was effectively submerged in 4 degrees Celsius seawater, but adrenaline dulled the sensation towards cold. Chris lay down, waiting for death. He began reflecting on his life. He thought of his unfinished house, and the wedding in 6 months that would never happen. His breathing grew more difficult, and his consciousness began to fade. Then everything went blank. According to Chris, he never saw the ROV, nor did he remember waving. Some later speculated that when the ROV arrived, he was already unconscious. Those movements may have just been reflex responses. Others believe that Chris was still conscious and truly waved back, but his body at that time was under extreme distress. The brain's protective mechanism may have hidden that memory, or effectively erased it. That's why Chris has no recollection of it. As for how he managed to survive for so long, it's very difficult to explain, as his case is extremely rare. Let's hear what Chris himself has to say.
How I survived is a very good question. I don't think I will ever really know. I always assumed that the lowering of my body temperature effectively shut me down and allowed me to survive on what minimal oxygen remained in my system. Also, I'm fairly certain that the high levels of oxygen which we carry in our emergency breathing gas saturated my tissues effectively with oxygen and allowed my organs to keep functioning even though I had nothing left to breathe. These are all theories though. Beyond that, I'm still waiting for someone to give me the right answer. I'm not sure I'll ever know.
While doctors were caring for Chris on the vessel, something he said was quite surprising. He said that when he was lying down there, he had already accepted death. Dying didn't feel like anything. He felt no pain at all, so there was no need to feel sorry for him. Just 3 weeks after the incident, Chris returned to diving working again. 6 months later, he married his fiancée. Now their child is already 10 years old, and the family lives happily together. I've always believed animals, especially the human body, are the most complex on Earth, as well as the most advanced existence. You could even call it a machine that is far beyond any supercomputer in comparison. If one day we can unlock this mystery, human progress will reach an entirely new level. Alright, that's the end of this video. Thank you for watching, and see you next time.